Hello. So, the first thing that we're going to do is I'll introduce myself. Hi, I'm Dr. Emily Friedman, and I am one of the critical profs of this channel. Officially, this video is designed just in case we have some late additions to the class next week. It's unlikely the class is full and the students seem really excited, but you never know. So, I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes literally recapping what we talked about in class today, and then I'll get into a little bit of AMA from the chat. So, today, strangely, was the first day of class because Auburn is on a interesting schedule, which means that our semester starts on Wednesday. So, this is a Tuesday, Thursday class that meets for 75 minutes. It fulfills requirements in the English department, both English education, which is technically outside of our department, as well as the requirements in our public and professional writing track. I'm an 18th centuryist by training, and yet here we are. So they are super excited, my friend, and yet here we are. So they are super excited, my friend. So, this class is being offered in its third instantiation. Every fall since 2021, I've taught some version of the study of tabletop role playing games. This time is different because every time is different, because this is a kind of experience that is ever dynamic and changing. The first time we threw all kinds of games and storytelling together, tabletop was one of them, but not the only. The second time we focused in on the study of actual play, performed play. This time we're coming back to focus on the ways that mechanics lead to meaning. So, one of the things that's going to happen in the next few weeks is students will adopt a tabletop role playing game to call their own and will do a series of deep dives and examinations of different questions around it. Did it win awards? Should it have? Has it been performed in actual play? Should it? Who made it? And what games were inspiring that game or are descended from that game? What kinds of mechanics does this game have? And what does it allow players to do and not to do? And how does all of that, plus the soft stuff, lead to a particular way of emulating or reflecting on our world? Luckily, we are going to be exploring several game systems that allow us some different ways of answering those questions. And we start on the very first day after doing the introductions of who's in the room and why they're here with Alex Roberts for the Queen. I've done this since the very beginning because it holds up, and hopefully, For the Queen will be back in print very soon because it is a classroom essential as far as I'm concerned. You can play it in 15 to 20 minutes if you remove enough of the cards. So, what I do is I lay it out on our tables at the very beginning of class before they've even arrived, with all of the queens in a row. And I take the deck, which is designed for an hour or more's worth of play, and I count out about 15 cards and put the rest in the box. Students are still shuffling and putting the queen somewhere in the stack, but they're instructed to put it pretty close to the bottom. Generally speaking, that means for about a 20-minute play experience, which is enough for the students to answer a few questions, to have some interesting things happen, and then for us to come back together. Which, considering that most of the 75 minutes is explaining what contract grading is, that's important. And I should probably explain what contract grading is. So, contract grading or labor based grading or ungrading are different ways and different slight variations on the idea of breaking away from the idea of grades as a kind of evaluative property. Instead, because there's only 15 students and this is my only class this semester, we individually contract. There are some things that every student must do in order to pass the class, but there's different scales of labor and intensity that I've calibrated so that students who don't necessarily want an A, or rather need an A, as they often put it, can choose a method of kind of triaging and labor that works for them. So, one of the things that we talked about today was the ways in which the contract works. All students will write an unessay, which is coming from my friend Ryan Cordell. Um, Unessays are basically trying to break out of the constraints of an essay structure and ask the um, students to instead think about, what do they want to communicate and how. It can look like a lot of different kinds of things. It can look like a game. It can look like a podcast or a series of interviews. It can look like anything. We just agree in advance about what the plan is going to be. In addition, students do different kinds of research tasks. That can be playing with their classmates, that can be analyzing actual play, that can be doing research tasks that I need doing that are appropriately scaled for about 2 to 4 hours. Or it can be something that they think of that they propose to me. And A level students do 5 of those, B level students do 4, and so on. We'll reevaluate each of those contracts at mid semester to see what's gotten done and what's left undone, and whether the student wants to upgrade their contract or dial back their labor in relationship to their other classes. So we're all on the same page. We spend the first 4 weeks getting oriented because, quite frankly, most of the class has minimal experience with tabletop role playing games. There are some hardcore players in the room, which is really lovely. And at this point in the culture, over half of the students have heard of Dungeons and Dragons, and a solid chunk of those have played it. We have a significant number, but not a majority, who have heard of actual play and some who consume it with some regularity. The Adventure Zone continues to be the most popular of those games. Um, and a very interesting development that I don't know what to do with was the student who introduced themselves by saying that they were only familiar with Dungeons and Dragons because their dad made them listen to Critical Role. A sentence I was not prepared to hear a student say, but here we are. So we got a lot of nervous newbies in the room, and For the Queen is really handy for that. It allows students the experience of making some character choices, watching emergent narrative come from the element of chance that comes with cards, but they don't have to worry about a character sheet or a lot of complicated mechanics. Those will come. But for now, it's enough to sit and tell a surprising little story that they didn't know was going to come out when they all sat down together. It's also a nice icebreaker. At the very beginning of class, students were definitely sitting together with the people that they were in their majors with. And we have some linguistics and international studies students. We have a fair number of public and professional writing students. We have those English education majors. And then we have some wild cards like the creative writing and electrical engineering major, which makes me very, very excited indeed. Students are already starting to think about what games they will adopt, although they don't have to do it for several weeks. This is a introductory day, and they've been primed for next week. We'll look at Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast. And that's in part because the class is still potentially dynamic. The enrollment won't lock in until after Tuesday. So we spend another week playing Yazeba's on Tuesday, and then on Thursday they'll have their choice of which of the episodes of the Jeff Stormer produced Yazeba's Bed and Breakfast. That includes people like Michelle Wynn Bradley and Matthew Mercer and Brennan Lee Mulligan in a dynamic cast. So we'll then talk and get to introduce the idea of actual play in advance of some of our upcoming guests. The other thing that's unusual about this semester is that for the very first time, asterisk, almost all of our guests are going to be coming in person. The very first time that we met, London Carlisle, who's a former student of mine and very active in Call of Cthulhu play, was able to join us. But generally speaking, we were taking advantage of the fact that the room is wired for sound and video, and everybody has Zoom, especially people involved in actual play. Um, Very grateful to all of the folks who joined us that first semester, including Bria Iyengar, B. Dave Walters and Tip Hunchings and Evan Torner and Tiffany Lee and so many more. Um, but this time, we were able to London does rule. But this time we were able to take advantage of the fact that my college provides a little bit of teaching enhancement money that can be used to facilitate folks coming over. We couldn't necessarily pay for a ton of plane rides down to Alabama, but for people who are in the Alabama, Georgia area, we for other things like Dragon Con is coming up, or people who have roots here in the South, we can make the offer of, hey, if you're already down here, we can pay for your transit to Auburn. We can pay for your hotel room. We might even be able to pay an honorarium, depending. And so that's facilitated us having some folks who will come in person. We will also be doing a live from Big Bad Con sort of pre-con event, just given the fact that I'll already be in San Francisco on Thursday when our class meets. And so will some lovely human beings who have graciously agreed to get on a Zoom call with my lovely students, who are indeed fabulous. Very excited about that. So uh, we've got Josh Simmons from Demiplane. We've got Ned Donovan of Encounter Party from D&D's new Fast channel. We have the glorious Gabe Hicks of everything, and Taylor Moore of Fortunate Horse, and the production mind behind Worlds Beyond Number, who the more people I find who have roots in the South, the more delighted I am. We talk so much about um, the LA scene. We talk a bit about the impact of Seattle and Chicago. We talk not as much as we should about Atlanta, and New York is scrapping for some kind of fight. I think that's mostly Eric Lang's kayfabe, but we've got this kind of way of talking about where things are happening that kind of ignores the deep roots that often people who are participating in the space do have to the South. And so the South has, as it does in many cultural spaces, a kind of interesting echo. So yeah, so that's the shape of this first class. 75 minutes really flew by, and I was very glad to have booked myself a pretty good buffer between when class ended and when I was going to go live here on YouTube, because it was one of those students very excited about possibilities, already talking about potential on essay projects, showing off the Descended from the Queen game system has already inspired one student, which is always a lovely thing to see. So yeah, so this is the so yeah, so this is the introduction to the class, and we will potentially go live again on Tuesday, probably at this same time, just to talk about how it went, how Yazebas went. Yazebas is a new experiment in the space. We've got a good combination of new and old games that are being played alongside the kind of completely reimagined middle of the class, which is walking through a kind of 360-degree vision of a game, and so that it's not me determining what that game is. Instead, each of them has a game that's associated with something that's interesting to them. So I've already got my thoughts about some for some students since we went around and talked about like why were they here and what's their major and what they're interested in. Their homework for the weekend is twofold. One is to think about the knowledge that they bring to this space. um, this is an exercise that I bring from my friend Gina Zarowski, called Where Do You Know From? And she, in turn, is inspired by Manel Matani and the work of Dr. Catherine McKittrick. And so the idea is instead of the usual icebreaker, this is a more in depth one. That ultimately is a process of reflecting about the different communities and ways of knowing both in the academy but also far beyond that inform who we are and the different kinds of knowledges and intelligences, and asks students to think about things like what their intellectual work is for, as well as reflecting on past meaningful assignments or processes of discovery that they've been part of. Um, and so after they do that marinating thinking, they don't have to write answers to all of those things, but they will craft about a single double-spaced page, 250 words, of a discussion post that will be read by both me and their classmates. So we've done a little bit of introduction, but this is where they get to sit a little bit and talk and think about what parts of themselves they want to bring into the space of the class. And again, it doesn't have to be everything. It can't be everything, but the things that they think are going to be most resonant with the space that we're in. They'll do that and they'll read a little bit of narratology, just a little bit from Jen Grueling's work on the narratology of tabletop role playing games, so that we'll have a little bit of stuff to sink our teeth into as we play Yazebas and think about how Yazebas is built. I like the idea that because for most students, this is all unfamiliar. If Yazebas becomes strangely the kind of or text for them, that makes me so happy, right? Like that they will then enter into other games, kind of doing that comparative work. Obviously, that's not true of all students because there are a fair number of students who have Pathfinder, D&D, and even Warhammer experience. But it'll be very interesting to have those students who have no background. And students asked if they needed to read the assigned reading from Gabe Hicks's new Kids Guide to Tabletop Role Playing Games, which is the best explainer of like the things that we all talk about and the terms we all use that we learned kind of from the oral tradition, but that are not in the scholarship. So dumb name or inaccurate name or imperfect name, really helpful text. But I told the student if they were feeling really anxious about not knowing things, they could go ahead and read it if they wanted to. But I was kind of putting it off to week 3 precisely because I don't know that you need it for Yazebas. And encountering Yazebas on its own terms is something that I can't do. So I'm very excited to see what the students do with this remarkable work. My job, my homework this weekend is taking all of the recommendations from social media. I believe it's about 120, if not more, at this point, and turning each of the recommended RPGs into a challenge rating. Students will contract for a particular challenge rating when they adopt their tabletop games. So if you want an A in the class, then you're going to need to sign up for a challenge rating 3 or higher, or adopt 2 or more games that add up to 3. So, for example, if somebody gets really excited about the work of Grant Howitt, who writes really resonant and interesting one pagers, then they'll have to take a look at 3 to see how they tick. So you can't just do Honey Heist, but you could also add some Pride and Extreme Prejudice and some other stuff in there. Uh, Yeah, there are definitely some ones, like, I imagined it as a level 3 scale, and then I realized that some things were gonna go to 5. Generally speaking, right now, the only thing that's listed as 5 that's actually made it onto the list, and it's mostly as a kind of cautionary tale, is the final game of Emily Care Boss's romance trilogy. Um, that's a that's not only a lot of people to have to field for running the game because they have to run the game, it's also very specific people that you would have to pull for that particular game. So yeah, but all is coming, all is emergent, and we're all trying to give each other a little bit of grace. But the hope is that we as we move through these initial weeks and we get to these meaty questions, we then are able to inspire new questions and new curiosities. And so I've left a few weeks at the end open up to where the students might want to go, what they might want. And so I've left a few weeks at the end open up to where the students might want to go, what they might want more of, less of, or different. So that's very, very exciting for me. Is that process as well? So yeah, that is the first day of class here. It is a very strange phenomenon, and um, John Boltana is here in the chat, and I am very grateful. And I think that one of the things that we have talked about our different positionalities is these are both in terms of their experience, they're advanced students, they're juniors and seniors. In terms of their experience with the material, they are many of it's a one-room schoolhouse of many different preparations, and that's an exciting place to be, and it means doing some interesting calibration, and so more soon. So for if you are new to this class who has been listening to this rambling after the fact, from the future, I'm glad you're here, and I look forward to finding more about you since, we missed you on day 1. To folks who are catching up, after the fact, with, catching asynchronously, if you have questions, please do put them in the comments below, and I will answer those, in the next live video. In the Colvillian doobly doo, there is a link to the syllabus as it stands today. And in fact, it's already been revised with additional material in terms of, links to useful sources and that sort of thing. But it gives you a good shape. A final version of the syllabus will ultimately be posted on Humanities Commons at the end of the semester to show where we ended up. But for now,